brought one with you, it's going to come up on the screen as well. We are continuing our series, Master Builders, Built to Last. We are looking at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus, at the end, he concludes this teaching by saying, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. What we're looking at in this series, Master Builders, is we are looking at this idea that if we want to build a strong foundation for our lives, we need to put into practice the teachings of Jesus. And specifically, we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount. We're picking out different elements as we go along to look at these words and to say, okay, if these are Jesus' words, how do we put them into practice? How do we apply them into our lives? So if you wouldn't mind turning with me to Matthew 6, or again, I think the majority of you just go like this, that you don't get your phone or Bible out. But we're going to look to verse 19 for our teaching this morning. Verse 19, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well done, Anglicans. I want to use this passage this morning really as a starting point from which we can talk about the heart. There's that phrase, where your treasure is, there your heart is also. It seems that the obstacle which might prevent us from wise and good investment or perhaps making good decisions in life, the obstacle often is the heart. Wherever our treasure is, there our hearts will be, Jesus says. In life, we follow what has captivated our hearts. And Jesus made it clear that we cannot serve two masters, because what we treasure, what we prioritize, the things which have most worth to us, or we place worth on, we place value on, the things that we prioritize in life, and our hearts follow those things, they eventually serve as masters in our lives. As our hearts get captivated and led by them, they become a master in our life. And this is, that phrase, follow your heart. You should never follow your heart. Don't follow your heart, because the heart is so easily swayed, so easily manipulated, so easily pulled in so many different directions. Don't follow your heart. Lead your heart. You've got to lead your heart in the right direction. And so if you've ever felt not at ease in life, or if you've ever felt like you're being torn between things, if you ever felt like you're longing for peace, and if you feel like you're being pulled in all sorts of different directions in life, well, it's because we were created to love. We were created to love and devote that love in a particular direction towards God. But the pull of life and other things will often pull our heart towards objects where we put our love towards. And those pullings can be so strong. I mean, our bank statements will often reveal where our priorities are. Someone here, I love it, on their bank statement, it will always say like the salad bar. But the salad bar is known to many of us as Subway. And then we've got the subscriptions, we've got the platforms, the sports channels, the Amazon orders, all the memberships. And I'm not saying those things are bad. Of course, we need those things often, but it often reveals what's important to us. Have you checked your bank statement recently for your priorities? Our bank statements, our calendars reveal what's important to us. Not just how we spend our money, but how we spend our time, how we use our time. I remember back before Fiona and I were married, and I would color code my calendar. And anything that was to do with Fiona was purple, was the color purple. And then I'd look at my calendar before the week, and I would just say, I need more purple in my life. I don't have enough purple in my week, because that's how I wanted to spend my time. She was important to me. Bank statements, calendars. Our thoughts as well. Have you ever done a thought audit? Have you ever audited the thoughts that sort of dominate your mind? Our inner thinking reveals what's important to us. The things that we think through, the things that we worry about, the stuff that has captured our hearts, the stuff that puts fear into us. Our lives are often heading in the direction of our strongest thoughts. And so have we looked at our thoughts and seen where our hearts are captivated in that area? And perhaps lastly, maybe we can tell where our priorities are by our body language, what we do with our bodies. You can tell what's important to me just by how I push a buggy. So Judah, our 7-month-old, when I push him in the buggy, I push him one-handed with my right hand specifically, because on my left hand, which is my watch, I've realized that when I push the buggy with my left hand or both hands, it doesn't track my steps properly. And so I need to walk like this so I can keep the step motion, because it doesn't. And it gets really difficult sometimes on the pavement or the curbs. But what's more important to me is making sure that my steps are tracked throughout the day. Where our treasure is, what the things are that we give most time, most airtime to, what we give our money to, what we place value on, what we give worth to, there our hearts are also. And the more we repeat these things, the more we train our hearts to live in this way, the more we train our hearts to live within these stories, we become what we repeatedly do and what we repeatedly give our hearts to. So maybe to look at the idea of consumerism. Consumerism at the core, I think, is this sense of not feeling like we have enough, needing to feel more whole by adding more to our lives. Our hearts then learn through that story that we're never enough, that we're never satisfied. Our hearts are always longing for the next thing. Or maybe there's this story, this love of being busy, being productive. Often at a deeper level is really a need to validate ourselves by the things that we do. Our worth comes from what we achieve and our successes are. Our hearts then learn in this story, don't stop. We can't stop, because we need to keep going. We need to keep achieving. We need to keep validating ourselves and our worth within the world by what we do and what we achieve. We can't stop. That's the story our hearts pick up. And the obvious problem when these things become the things that captivate our hearts, when these things become the masters in our lives, is that we can't serve two masters. It's that they will always demand what they demand. Productivity won't suddenly be like, oh, well done, you've done enough, take a rest. No, it always requires what it requires. It wants you to keep requiring more. And our hearts, if it's trained within that sort of understanding, will just carry on, even at the cost of burnout. Our hearts won't recognize the consequence. That's our job, to lead our hearts, not be following our hearts. And Jesus said, these things are temporary. They won't last. And yet our heart longs for them just the same. And so if we want to store up treasure in heaven, as Jesus said, if we want to store treasure in heaven, if we want to build a strong foundation for our lives, we need to address the heart. We need to address the heart. I don't know if it was I think it was in the 2010s where this sort of very Christian phrase was going around, but it was that sort of like, how's your heart? And it was this thing, but how is your heart? How is your heart? What does your heart lean towards? Do you feel that tension, that pull in life? Do you recognize these things that have captured and captivated your heart? And do you recognize where your heart is being shaped by living life in whatever way it is? And do you want to do something about it? Do you want to change the way that your heart is being shaped? Well, today I want to talk about how worship is the antidote for the heart. Worship of God is the antidote for the heart. An author, James K.A. Smith, one of my favorite authors, has really helped develop my thinking around discipleship. He says this: worship is the arena in which God recalibrates our hearts, reforms our desires, and rehabituates our loves. Worship isn't just something we do, it is where God does something to us. Worship is the heart of discipleship because it is the gymnasium in which God retrains our hearts. For Calvin, the great theologian Calvin, he says the worship of the church is a matter of divine activity rather than human creativity. God is doing something in us as we worship. And I love that image that James K.A. Smith said about worship being like a gym where God is retraining our hearts. You can probably tell I don't frequent the gym very often, but I do regularly attend this heart-forming spiritual gym that he's talking about. You know, and through worship, I know that my heart is being changed, my life is being changed. Whenever I see an increase on the scales, I just assume the armor of God's probably pretty heavy, isn't it? The armor of God must be heavy because it keeps going up. Worship is the heart of discipleship because it is the gymnasium in which God retrains our hearts. Because in worship, firstly, God rewires and restores our hearts, rewires and recalibrates our hearts. Worship rewires or recalibrates the heart. When we wander in life, when we lose our way, we have to reorient ourselves. We need to get our bearings back, figure out where we are before we can then move on. Having grown up on the south coast in Brighton, it was a simple life. South was the sea, and the sea was south. And since moving here to the Bay, I've had to really get used to the sea being east. The sea is east. I thought I knew where I was until I moved here. And if we're lost, we would use a compass. If we're out in Dartmoor or wherever, and we get lost, we might use a compass to re-navigate ourselves. And if you like, our heart is a compass. And our heart's true north is Jesus. That's how we're wired. That's what we're created for. Created to be in a loving relationship with God. But life, as we've already mentioned, can just veer us off. Can just get us off track, off course a little bit. And we can feel it. And that's where pain, that's where anxiety, that's where restlessness comes from. Where we're not living as we were made to be, where we've gone off course slightly and we need to be recalibrated, reoriented back to our true north. St. Augustine, this is our favorite quote here at Bay Church, but St. Augustine says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." Worship recalibrates the heart. It shows us true north again. It repositions us. Pete, one of our curates who's just away this weekend, he talks about this in that we need like heart surgery. We need like a rewiring in which what God does through worship. And we need that rewiring. We need that repositioning for our lives. When we experience this, what we receive in worship through this rewiring, this recalibrating, we receive a revelation of like, oh, this is what life is meant to feel like all along. We need some rewiring. So let me give you an example. We have 2 subs over here by this stage, 2 subs. And I was really keen when we were setting up the church, setting up the sound system, that we had 2 subs. Because when Jack hits that kick drum, I want my rib cage to reverberate. That's the kind of like level I want to be at. That's the church I want to attend. That's what I'm after. And so But for a long time, we just weren't getting that oomph. We weren't getting that, what we were kind of after. We weren't getting what we felt like these 2 subs should give us. And we couldn't figure out why. We just couldn't figure out why we weren't getting that. And my rib cage was just still and silent in worship. But Chris, who is our resident wizard of sound, he was helping us doing a bit of work, doing a bit of retuning of the sound system, and he just thought to check the subs and how they're wired. And it turns out that only one of our subs was wired properly. And so for 18 months, we had 2 subs in the room, but only one of them was on. Only one of them. And we turned them on. If any of you came to carols at Christmas, that was a wall of sub, wasn't it? That was a wall of sound. And the difference, oh my goodness, this is what they are meant to sound like. Oh my goodness. And a quick rewiring, and my goodness, the difference. That's what it's meant to feel like. That's what it's meant to sound like. And Jesus does the same for us in worship. One of the ways in which my heart is pulled, and where I go off, I veer off, is perhaps maybe you describe it as like heroism. This need to be a hero. This need to like shoulder the responsibility for stuff. And particularly for that's for me, like the church, shouldering the responsibility for the church, the success of the church, the health of our culture. But what that does is it puts a lot of pressure on me. And any failures in those areas, any missing the mark in those areas is a personal failure of mine, because my heart believes that is my responsibility. But when I worship, God rewires that and reveals his truth. And I'll be worshiping, and then I have these moments, having been God rewiring, recalibrating myself, restoring me to my rightful mind, what I should be thinking. And I go, oh God, of course, you're in control. You carry it. This is your church. You're in control, and you're not going to waver. You're not going to fall under the pressure. You've got this. You're in control. You're Lord. You've got it. I don't need to take on all the responsibility. And I go, that's how I'm meant to feel. Wow. Because in worship, God recalibrates and rewires our hearts. Secondly, in worship, God restores and restories our hearts. Restores and restories our hearts. The story you live in is the story you live out. And worship places us back firmly in the story of God's love for us. The great philosopher Alistair MacIntyre famously said, I cannot answer the question, what ought I to do? Like, what should I do? Unless I first answer the question, what story am I a part? And these stories of productivity, achievement, success, worthiness, finding our worth in the things that we do, the people that we know, the jobs that we have, our status in society, what they do is they lead us on a path of deformation. If we're being formed, we're being formed by the world, formed by lots of things, but it leads us on a path of deformation because we become less of who we were made to be when we live under these stories and these narratives for our lives. And we can't think our way back to then reformation. The answer to deformation isn't information. We're not suddenly going to learn lots of stuff and great, we're fixed. Because it's a heart thing. It's a heart thing, which is precisely why worship is the antidote. Worship is the gymnasium in which God retrains our hearts. Because in worship, when we're worshiping, singing, praying, wherever we are, when we worship, we're not downloading new knowledge for the mind, but we're experiencing something in the heart. So many of you have come up to me over the few months or over the years, and you said, I come to Bay Church and I worship and I just can't stop crying. Why am I crying? I say, well, because God's doing something in your heart and in your life. God's doing something. God is transcribing the story, etching the story of his love for you and for the whole world in your heart. And what that does is it begins to restore us. It helps us, helps to reform us into the people that we were made to be by restoring us, by placing us back in the story of God's love for us, undoing all the damage of the stories of the world that we've been living by, of productivity, of finding our worth in other things, whatever it is, undoing the damage of that and replacing us in the story of God's love and restoring us to who we were made to be. God's love through worship restores us. I love it when those painting restorers take an old painting that has sort of been damaged and faded. Here's an example coming up on the screen where these restorers take these damaged or like faded pictures and they return it to its former glory. I mean, I love it even more when it goes wrong. These are fun. So, but at home, I've been trying to be a bit of a picture restorer. Our 4-year-old Elijah, he loves to draw. And actually, it's really, really impressive what he does and his gift for drawing. But often he'll draw something great, but then he'll like add something in. And then suddenly he doesn't like it. He's like, oh no, I made a mistake. Or I don't actually want that in the picture anymore. And what he'll do is he'll just pick up the paper, screw it up and throw it away. Because in his eyes, it's beyond repair. Because it was meant to just be a dragon, not a dragon and a cow. I don't want the cow there anymore. It's beyond repair. And then I tried to suggest, this is how we can make it. Let's try and restore it. Let's do this. But no, he's adamant. That picture is ruined now. There's no chance of restoring that picture. And I resonate a lot with that in my life. I resonate with that sense of it can't be restored. There's no chance for it. Because when I was 20, I was living within the story that sort of said, Matt, be funny, be likable, be popular, and that's where your worth is. And I achieved those things, as you can tell from my funny jokes. But what I did is I ended up destroying and damaging my reputation through a lot of silly mistakes and a lot of bad choices in my life. And when I was 20, for a long time, I adopted this story that said I was unforgivable because of the things that I had done to people. I was unrestorable. And I took myself out of church. I said, I can't be in a place where I thought I wasn't welcomed. I couldn't be in a place where I felt like all my failures and all my mistakes had defined me, and there was no hope of forgiveness or being restored. And that time in my life, it was a long, painful process, but I had a friend who just committed to me every week to meeting up, encouraging me back into church eventually. He tried to speak a different story over my life, one where there was hope for forgiveness. When I eventually came back to church, almost kicking and screaming, giving God one last opportunity to turn my life around, I guess. I remember standing in worship and sort of tears streaming down my face because I felt like I'd come home. I felt like I had been forgiven. I had that sense of peace as I worshiped in this new church plant. And I knew that at that moment, I was going to dedicate my life to church and to Jesus and to helping people to feel that same sense of being welcomed home. For the stories that we carry, those that we live by, those stories, Jesus offers us healing. Jesus offers us redemption, restoration, and a new story to live by. Because where the stories of earning our worth through busyness or productivity or constant striving, they lead to burnout. But Jesus' story offers us freedom. Where the stories of feeling the need to be the hero or carrying the burdens of everyone or holding the responsibility, those stories lead us to exhaustion, anxiety, fears, and worries. But Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. And where the stories of feeling perhaps unworthy, feeling unforgivable, feeling like you've lost hope, or feeling alone, we're feeling like we're not enough, Jesus says to us that our worth is not determined by how anyone else determines us, but our worth is determined by how He says we are and who we are. Our worth to God then was made most clear when Jesus took our sin and took our shame to the cross, died in our place so that we might receive forgiveness and we might receive freedom and we might receive salvation for our lives. That's where God says, you are worth all of this. I love you. Come home. And in worship, then God restores us, restores us. He recalibrates and rewires our hearts. And so if you want to build a strong foundation for your life, let the foundation be your worship of God, where your hearts are made new, where our hearts return to the place that they were meant to be, where our hearts return home, and we experience the love and the peace that God has to offer for us. Amen. Amen. Let's stand and we're going to